Imagine a world where one man's boredom meant your execution, where children vanished in silence, where smoke rose every night, not from battle, but from burning the evidence of slaughter. This isn't a movie. It's the true story of Amon Göth, the monster of Plaszow. Are you ready to face the darkness history tried to bury? He did not need a reason to kill. Only a glance, a nod, and lives were erased. A snap of his fingers, and starving dogs tore into human flesh. From the balcony of a villa filled with chandeliers, velvet drapes, and fine wine, he looked down upon a sea of misery. Outside those walls, thousands withered in hunger and terror. Inside, he dined like a king. His name was Amon Göth, an officer who became the embodiment of death at Plaszow, a man whose cruelty blurred the line between myth and nightmare. This was no battlefield, no clash of armies. This was a kingdom built on fear, where one man's will determined who lived and who vanished into smoke. Survivors whispered that he killed not from necessity, but from desire, a whim, a dark amusement. In the mornings, he would summon prisoners, choose one at random, and end a life to prove his power. In the evenings, he raised his glass, while the stench of burning bodies drifted through the night air. History remembers Auschwitz as the face of the Holocaust. But Plaszow, just outside Krakow, was a living nightmare shaped in the image of Amon Göth, a place where the human spirit was crushed, where the sound of gunshots replaced the rhythm of breathing, where every sunrise carried the weight of despair. This is not fiction. This is not a tale crafted for cinema. It is the truth. And the truth is darker than any screenplay. Are you ready to step into the shadows and face the monstrous reality of the man who ruled Plaszow with a trigger finger and a smile? Amon Leopold Göth was born on December 11, 1908, in Vienna, Austria. He came from a family of means, a Catholic household that owned a respected publishing business. His parents expected him to inherit the company, to live a quiet life surrounded by books and tradition. But the young Göth was restless. He had no love for ink and paper. His heart craved power, action, and the thrill of belonging to something greater, something darker. By the age of 17, he had already taken a dangerous path. In 1925, when Austria still banned the Nazi movement, Göth secretly joined the Austrian branch of the National Socialist Party. He smuggled weapons. He delivered secret messages. He slipped into the underworld of extremist politics, feeding an obsession with racial superiority and violence. To him, the idea of the German people as a chosen race was not just propaganda. It was gospel. He believed that brutality was not only acceptable, but necessary. Violence was the currency of destiny. By 1931, his loyalty earned him entry into the SS, the Schutzstaffel. Here, the transformation became complete. The SS did not need soldiers who questioned. It needed zealots who obeyed without hesitation. In their barracks, discipline was absolute. Their training was not only in tactics and weapons, it was indoctrination. Systematic, relentless, designed to erase doubt, to replace humanity with fanaticism. Göth thrived. He absorbed their creed like a disciple at the feet of a prophet. Anti-Semitism became not just belief, but identity. He grew into the perfect instrument, a man who could act with precision and without conscience. The boy who once ignored his family's business had found a new inheritance, the black uniform, the death's head insignia, and a cause that promised him power. Step by step, Amon Göth was moving closer to the role history would condemn him for. Lord of a camp where death was measured not in numbers, but in moments of cruelty. In 1943, as the Reich hungered for more labor and more blood, Amon Göth received his defining assignment. he was chosen to build and command a new labor camp on the outskirts of Krakow. Its name would soon echo in terror: Plaszow. The ground was not yet prepared. Fences half finished, barracks still rising. Prisoners themselves laid the bricks of their own captivity. And yet Göth wasted no time. He stepped into the role not as an administrator, but as a monarch of death. From the first day, his presence was unmistakable. His word was law. His gaze was judgment. His trigger was execution. The cleansing of the Krakow ghetto marked his arrival. In March 1943, the streets of the Jewish quarter exploded with gunfire. Families were torn from their homes. Children clung to mothers only to be ripped away. Göth directed the operation personally. With a nod, with a wave of his hand, people were herded into trucks or shot where they stood. Witnesses recalled his cold composure. To him, it was not horror. It was order. It was duty, twisted into cruelty. When the ghetto lay in ruins, Plaszow became his dominion. No laws, no limits, only fear. Each morning, prisoners assembled in trembling silence, praying their eyes would not meet his. For if they did, a bullet might follow. Work gangs dragged stone, built roads, quarried rock for German industry. If one faltered, Göth made an example. A slow group might be executed in its entirety. A single act of weakness meant death for dozens. And above it all, his figure loomed. Sometimes on horseback, surveying his camp like a feudal lord. Sometimes with a rifle, leaning casually on a balcony, selecting lives to end as if boredom demanded it. Guards followed his example. Beatings and random shootings became daily rituals. Plaszow, under Göth, was no labor camp. It was a theater of terror, staged by a man who relished the part he played. By the end of that year, prisoners no longer spoke of tomorrow. They survived from hour to hour, knowing that the man in black could erase them with a glance. For Amon Göth, murder had become not a necessity, but a pastime. And for the thousands trapped behind the fences, every sunrise meant another day in the kingdom of the executioner. Life inside Plaszow was not survival. It was slow annihilation. Prisoners were herded into overcrowded barracks, wooden shells crammed shoulder to shoulder, stripped of privacy, stripped of dignity. In the winters, frost bit into their bones. In the summers, heat suffocated like fire. Lice crawled in their clothes. Rats scurried beneath their straw mats. Disease spread as fast as despair. There were no pillows, no blankets, no clean water. Every breath was borrowed. Every night was a gamble. Food was a mockery, watery soup, a crust of bread shared by many. Men and women gnawed on grass, chewed wood, swallowed dirt, anything to trick the stomach into silence. And yet if caught stealing a single crumb, punishment was swift and merciless, a beating in front of the camp. Or worse, a bullet delivered as a warning to all. For the children, existence was shorter, crueler. They were not seen as human. They were obstacles to labor, mouths that consumed without producing. Families were torn apart upon arrival. Mothers screamed as little hands were pulled away, never to return. Those who remained endured the unendurable, beaten for crying, silenced for asking, erased for simply being. Some were led out in groups, told they were being relocated. None were ever seen again. And in this darkness, another horror unfolded. The Reich grew fearful of its own legacy. Evidence of slaughter had to vanish. Göth became the overseer of an obscene operation. Sonderkommando units, Jewish prisoners forced into complicity, were ordered to unearth mass graves. With bare hands, they pulled rotting bodies from the earth, dragged them to pyres, and burned them until the night sky glowed with ash. The stench of death clung to every gust of wind. Göth watched with a cigar between his fingers, amused by the speed at which the corpses burned. For him, this was not disposal. It was spectacle. And when a group of Sonderkommando weakened, when exhaustion broke their bodies, they too were executed, replaced by fresh captives, condemned to the same cycle of desecration. Plaszow was not a labor camp. It was an abyss, a machine of suffering, a place where hope was stripped layer by layer until nothing remained but silence, fear, and the certainty that death would come, whether by bullet, by disease, or by fire. While prisoners collapsed in filth and hunger, Amon Göth built himself a palace. Rising within the camp's perimeter was not a barrack, not a command post, but a villa. Inside, velvet carpets muffled the floor. Crystal glasses sparkled with fine wine. Paintings stolen from Jewish homes adorned the walls. Every piece of furniture, every spoon, every chandelier was plundered from the dead. Here he lived like royalty. He dressed in tailored suits. He dined on stolen delicacies. He hosted banquets for SS officers while smoke from the cremation pits drifted through his windows. His wealth was not only measured in objects, but in lives. Prisoners were forced into service, some reduced to slaves within his household. One of them, a young Jewish girl named Helena, was torn from the crowd and pressed into his villa as a maid. She cleaned his floors, poured his drinks, and lived in constant terror, knowing that even a glance, even a sigh could provoke his fury. Göth treated death as entertainment. When bored, he stood on the balcony with his rifle, scanning the yard below. A movement too slow, a step out of line. A life ended in an instant, for nothing more than amusement. When restless, he loosed his dogs on trembling captives, watching their screams dissolve into silence. To him, cruelty was not duty, it was pleasure. Beside him lived Ruth Irene Calder, a devoted German woman who became his mistress, later mother to his daughter. In 1944, their child Monica was born under the shadow of barbed wire in a house built upon stolen lives. The irony was grotesque. A child's first cry echoing in a place where thousands of others had been silenced forever. Yet even within the SS, whispers grew. Not of his murders, those were applauded, but of his greed. Göth siphoned gold, jewelry, cash, and valuables for himself, hoarding what by Nazi decree should have been surrendered to the Reich. He sold prisoners as labor to factories for bribes. He enriched himself so openly that his own masters took notice. In September 1944, the unthinkable happened. The SS arrested him, not for mass murder, not for cruelty beyond measure, but for theft, for corruption, for daring to steal too much from the machine of genocide. The man who had lived like a king was dragged from his throne, betrayed not by morality, but by greed. It was the beginning of his fall, and the first crack in the mask of power that had cloaked the tyrant of Plaszow. By late 1944, the Reich itself was crumbling. Armies pressed in from east and west. Cities once thought eternal now smoldered in ruin. And Amon Göth, the tyrant of Plaszow, sat in a prison cell, not for the thousands he had murdered, but for the gold and treasures he had stolen. The SS, his own brotherhood, had turned on him. Yet before their trial could begin, before their judgment could fall, the empire collapsed into dust. In May 1945, mere days after Germany's surrender, Göth was captured by American soldiers in Austria. There would be no escape. His name was already infamous, his deeds already whispered by the broken survivors who had seen him rule with rifle and whip. Poland demanded his extradition, and soon he was sent back to Krakow, back to the city he had scarred, to face the justice he had once denied so many. The trial opened in August 1946. The charges were clear: war crimes, crimes against humanity, mass murder. Witnesses filed in, one after another. Former prisoners who had survived his reign stood before the court. Helena, once his maid, spoke of the terror inside his villa. Others described the executions, the children torn from their parents, the endless smoke of burning bodies. Each word was a blade, cutting through his last defenses. Göth did not deny the killings. He could not. Instead, he reached for the old refrain: "I only followed orders." But the world had heard enough of that excuse. The judges rejected it. History rejected it. Responsibility could not be shifted, not when his finger had pulled the trigger, not when his voice had commanded the slaughter. On September 5th, 1946, the sentence was read: death by hanging. The execution was carried out at Montelupich prison in Krakow, the very city where he had once stood as master. At 37 years old, Amon Göth met the rope. He died not as a king, not as a conqueror, but as a criminal, a man stripped of power, reduced to silence, consumed by the same finality he had inflicted on thousands. The aftermath was not closure. It was a scar. The ground of Plaszow remained poisoned by memory, haunted by the voices of the dead. And though Göth's body vanished into history, the shadow of his crimes lingered, a wound in the conscience of mankind. The shadow of Amon Göth did not end with the tightening of a rope. It lingers still, in testimony, in memory, in the earth of Plaszow itself. More than 30,000 souls passed through that camp. Barely a fraction survived. Over 8,000 perished by bullet, by disease, by hunger, or by the dogs he unleashed for sport. Each death was a number carved into the ledger of atrocity. Each was a voice silenced by a man who believed cruelty was strength. Yet the world did not forget. Helena, the young girl once forced to serve him inside his villa, later told her story. She spoke of the fear that hung over every breath, of the casual murders witnessed from his balcony, of the silence that cloaked each night. Her testimony joined countless others, piecing together the portrait of a tyrant who hid behind uniform and rank. Decades later, cinema carried his image to millions. In 1993, Schindler's List brought Göth back to the screen, his cruelty embodied by actor Ralph Fiennes. The film showed only fragments of reality, yet even those fragments chilled audiences around the world. For many, it was their first glimpse into the abyss that was Plaszow, and the monster who ruled it. Today, historians, survivors, and descendants still speak his name, not with reverence, but with warning. Göth represents what happens when ideology erases humanity, when obedience becomes an excuse for evil, when a man chooses power over compassion. He lived like a king, surrounded by stolen luxury. He died as a criminal, condemned by the very system he once served. The legacy of Amon Göth is not his villa, nor his brief power, nor even his death on the gallows. It is the memory of suffering he inflicted. It is the reminder that even in the heart of civilization, darkness can rise in human form. To remember his crimes is to resist their return. To speak of his victims is to restore their stolen voices. And to walk through the ruins of Plaszow today is to stand in the presence of silence that demands never again.